Week 2, Overview, the Byzantine Empire and the Eastern Orthodox Church. This week is devoted to learning about the lands and culture of the Byzantine Empire. Last year we learned that in AD 395 the Roman Empire was split permanently into the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. This week we'll see the start of a split in the Christian Church as well. The Eastern Orthodox churches carry on the legacy of the Byzantine Empire nearly 1,000 years after it split with the Roman Catholic Church. The word Byzantine comes from Byzantium, the Greek name for a city on the waterway that connects the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. There, Constantine the Great built the great capital city of the Eastern Roman Empire, Constantinople, on the ruins of Byzantium. When he took up residence in the eastern capital, anybody who was anybody, the wealthy, the scholars, and the leaders of Roman culture, moved too. As we noted last week, the Western Roman Empire disintegrated when savage barbarian tribes from the north attacked it. The eastern half lived on as the Byzantine Empire. Initially, this was very Roman. Over time, however, it became a real mixture of eastern and western ways. The Byzantine Empire was strongest under one of its earliest and greatest emperors, Justinian I. Under Justinian, the Byzantines conquered lands around the Mediterranean Sea that had been lost by the Western Roman Empire. They expanded trade with the Far East, and they established a style of art and architecture all their own. Justinian wanted to bring back the glory days of Rome by regaining the territory in the west. Under his leadership, the empire reconquered Italy, the southeastern coast of Spain, and much of northern Africa. Justinian was an Orthodox Christian who hunted down heretics, Jews, and pagans. In 529, he shut down the schools of philosophy in Athens because of their non-Christian teachings. The people of Constantinople did not love him. In 532, they revolted and burnt down the central part of the city. Justinian rebuilt Constantinople, including a huge new church, the famous Hagia Sophia, which means Holy Wisdom. He also built aqueducts, fortresses, harbors, churches, monasteries, and public buildings all over the empire. All this was very expensive. Justinian's empire was bankrupt when he died in 565, and then the barbarians came. Slavs and Avars invaded the Balkans, and Persians attacked from the east. Things got even worse in the next century. Arabs attacked the weakened empire after Muhammad converted them to Islam after 634. By 642, these Muslim Arabs had conquered Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. By the early 700s, the Byzantine Empire was down to a fraction of its former size, holding on to only Turkey, the Balkan coast, the south of Italy, and some islands in the Mediterranean. The people that drove Justinian's forces out of Italy were the Lombards. They originally inhabited an island in the Baltic Sea, near Sweden, but they migrated, first into what we know as Germany and then down to present-day Austria. They invaded Italy in 568. They took over much of the Italian peninsula, driving out the Byzantine forces and threatening the popes who ruled what was left of Rome. The Lombards were neither Catholic nor Orthodox. They were pagan and or Arian. In 754, Pope Stephen II asked another barbarian group, the Franks, for help. The Frankish leader, Pepin the Short, came to the rescue. He invaded Italy, defeated the Lombards, and then gave some of the land he took from them to the Pope in 756. This gift, called Pepin's donation, turned the popes into princes of their own papal states. In 774, Charlemagne, Pepin's son, crushed the Lombards. We'll be learning more about Charlemagne in week 4. By the time the Lombards were attacking Italy, what used to be Rome was in bad shape. The Byzantine Empire kept classical culture alive to some degree in the East, but the light of learning almost went completely out in the West. The only places where books could reliably be found were the monasteries, which kept literacy alive through Europe's darkest days. Your children will be learning about the monastic movement this week. It began in the 3rd century, as Christianity began to be more acceptable in the Roman Empire. It seems as if just as the world began to accept Christianity, some Christians began to turn their backs on the world. The earliest monks were hermits, people who left civilization to dwell alone in desert places. By the late 4th century, they began to join together in monasteries, where people sought holiness and God in lives devoted to prayer and service. In the 400s, St. Patrick established monasteries that helped carry the gospel on to Scotland and then down to England. Patrick was born in Roman Britain. When he was about 16 years old, he was captured by Irish raiders and taken as a slave to Ireland, where he lived for 6 years before escaping and returning to his family. He returned to Ireland as a missionary, though, and converted most of Ireland's tribes to Christ. A couple of Patrick's letters have survived. In his Confessio he wrote that he had baptized thousands of people. He ordained priests to lead the new Christian communities. He converted wealthy women, some of whom became nuns, much to the displeasure of their families. He converted several sons of kings to Christianity, too. Later biographies told amazing stories of his contests with druids and pagan kings. According to these sources, he overthrew the pagan idols and called down God's curses on those who opposed the gospel. Ireland is full of legends of Patrick. They say he banished the snakes from the island. There isn't much evidence that there ever were snakes there, but the Druids used serpent symbols in their rituals, and he certainly went after that. They also say he taught the Irish about the Trinity by showing them a shamrock. The 3 leaves symbolized 3 persons in one God. Patrick started something big there in Ireland. Courageous Irish monks took the Christian message across the narrow sea to Scotland, where they built more monasteries. These monks took the message into England, and English monks crossed the English Channel to carry the gospel further south into Gaul. These monasteries were a major means of keeping literacy alive, too, during these long, dark ages. In Western Europe, almost no one could read. There was a lot more literacy in the Byzantine Empire, but it was still primarily an oral culture. One could be a highly educated person in Byzantium and still not know how to read, because so much of what constituted education consisted of learning facts and stories. They may have been unlettered, but that doesn't mean they were ignorant. The lack of literacy meant that pictures were very important to them. People used religious pictures called icons to help them worship, even though the 10 Commandments forbid making any graven image. When the Byzantine emperors tried to outlaw religious images, it led to one of the great conflicts in church history, the iconoclastic controversy. It weakened the Byzantine Empire at a critical juncture, just when the Muslims were expanding into their territories. We'll look more closely at that controversy next week. Despite the emperor's attempts to banish images, the Eastern churches refused to give them up. They've retained their icons to this day. This has had a major influence on Eastern art. Byzantine art's beautiful, but it's very different from what we're used to in the West. In Western Europe, artists strove to be original or unique. They tried to capture something new or different, something that's never been seen before. Byzantine art, by contrast, generally tries to represent what is eternal, which, by definition, can't be new. We can see some of the unique features of Byzantine architecture in the Orthodox churches. In general, their buildings are plain on the outside and magnificently decorated on the inside, an intentional reflection of the difference between the emptiness of the world outside and the majesty of the spiritual realities within. Where Catholic or Protestant churches tend to be oriented forwards, towards a crucifix or a pulpit in the front, Orthodox churches are oriented upwards. The worshipper's eye is drawn up to the dome, which is dominated by an image of the resurrected Christ. Orthodox painters and architects aren't allowed to decorate just any way they want. There's a strict code as to what may be portrayed and how. Most portraits are frontal views, on a solid background of gold or a single color. The goal is not to make the figures look real or to locate them in some specific place. They're supposed to provide a glimpse into eternity, not a snapshot of the here and now. There's more to Byzantine art than just the mosaics and frescoes in churches, though. They also specialized in illuminated manuscripts, in icons painted onto wood or silk, and in highly decorated objects. Despite their support for icons, Byzantium never developed much in the way of sculpture. They considered most sculptures too much like idols. We'll be focusing mostly on Western Europe for the rest of this unit, without following Byzantium all that closely, so let's look ahead to the end of the Eastern Empire now. After Byzantium's destructive debate over icons, the empire began to expand again in the 800s. Byzantine armies drove the Arabs back on several fronts. From 867 to 1025, under Emperor Basil I and his descendants, the empire achieved another major period of success. A quarrel with the West began in 1054. That year, a dispute over the Pope's authority in the empire led to a permanent break between the churches in the western and eastern sections. Then, in 1071, seafaring Normans conquered the Byzantine lands of Sicily and southern Italy. That same year, the Turks defeated a Byzantine army in Asia Minor, threatening their control over what is now Turkey. The Byzantine emperor asked the Christians in the West to help them defend the empire against the Turks. The result was the Crusades, which started off with Christians attacking Muslims and capturing Jerusalem. By the Fourth Crusade, in 1204, however, Catholic Christians were attacking Orthodox Christians in Constantinople. The Byzantines recaptured their capital city eventually, but the Turks took Asia Minor and the Serbs took the Balkans. By the late 1300s, all that was left of the great Byzantine Empire was Greece and the city of Constantinople. The empire ended in 1453, when Ottoman Turks captured Constantinople. The last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, died while defending his city. The Eastern Orthodox churches carry on the legacy of Byzantium. They include churches in Greece, Russia, Eastern Europe, and Western Asia. About 170 million people belong to Eastern Orthodox churches. The Eastern and Western churches had been drifting apart ever since the Roman Empire was divided, but the split between them was not permanent until 1054. The two sides had not fully agreed over the nature of the Trinity. The Western Church taught that God the Father begot Jesus, and then the Holy Spirit proceeded from the Father and the Son. The Eastern Church believed the Spirit proceeded from the Father alone. The difference showed up as a single Latin word in the Creed, filioque, and from the Son. But that one word helped divide East and West. It wasn't just one word that split the Church, however. The other straw that broke the camel's back was the role of the Pope. For 2 centuries, East and West had argued over the extent of his authority, but in 1054, both sides excommunicated each other. Though the empire finally vanished, it still lasted a very long time. Over 1,000 years. That's more than 4 times longer than the United States has been a country. Don't forget that Rome had already existed for more than 1,000 years when Constantine first moved his capital to Byzantium, so the total lifespan of the culture was over 2,000 years. During its long history, the Byzantine Empire protected much of Europe from the attacks of barbarians and such Eastern invaders as the Arabs and the Turks. The Byzantines preserved ancient Greek literature and philosophy, as well as Roman governmental and legal traditions. Their empire lasted a long time and still affects the world today. Millions of people continue to worship in the Eastern Orthodox churches that carry on the legacy of Byzantium.